All right, so we're continuing with Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes and illustrated by Lynd Ward and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. We are way back here, starting chapter 11, Yankee Doodle. So in the past chapter and section, chapter 10, section 4, this is really kind of the famous reference to Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. He's not alone, though. Some people might think, oh, he's the only rider. No, he's not. Billy Dawes is the other rider who went out over the neck on land, while Paul Revere went out over the river to get over the Charles to the other side on Charlestown, where they had a horse waiting for Paul Revere. So he had to go by the powerful 64-gun Somerset British warship sitting in the harbor, and he was able to sneak by, even in the full moonlight, on this lovely spring night. But while all this was happening, Johnny had been the messenger to tell the fellow who's going to put the 2 lanterns up in Christ Church. And so Johnny did his job, then went back to Dr. Warren's, and he was very tired because of Rab leaving for war, and he hadn't slept good the last couple of nights, and so here he is at Dr. Warren's, and he sleeps and sleeps and sleeps, and the war had begun while he was sleeping, and now it's the dawn of the 19th, and that is the day the war started, the 19th of April. So, chapter 11, Yankee Doodle. So, Johnny slept. It was daylight when he woke, with Warren's hand upon his shoulder. Outside on Tremont Street, he could hear the clumping of army boots. A sergeant was swearing at his men. The soldiers were paraded so close to the house, which stood flush with the sidewalkless street, that Johnny at first thought they must be in the room. Dr. Warren dared speak no louder than a whisper. "I'm going now." Something's happened. Something's happened? Yes. He motioned Johnny to follow him into the kitchen. This room was on the back of the house. They could talk without danger of being overheard by the troops in the street. That's how close everybody is. It's like literally just on the other side of the wall. Dr. Warren had on the same clothes as the day before. He had not been to bed. But now his hat was on his head. His black bag of instruments and medicines was packed and on the table. Silently, he put milk, bread, herrings beside it, and gestured to Johnny to join him. "Where did it begin?" asked Johnny. "Lexington." "Who won?" "They did." 700 against 70. It wasn't a battle. It was just target practice for them. Some of our men were killed, and the British huzzaed and took the road to Concord. And did they get our supplies there? I don't know. Paul Revere sent for me just after the firing on Lexington Green. The young man's usually fresh-colored face was haggard. He knew the seriousness of this day for himself and for his country. But everywhere the alarm is spreading. Men are grabbing their guns, marching for Concord. Paul Revere did get through in time last night. Billy Dawes a little later. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Minutemen are on the march. Before the day's over, there'll be real fighting, not target practice. But Gage doesn't know that it's begun. You see, long before Colonel Smith got to Lexington, just as soon as he heard that Revere had warned the country, he sent back for reinforcements, for Earl Percy. You and I, Johnny, are just about the only people in Boston who know that blood has already been shed. Were many killed at Lexington? No, not many. They stood up, just a handful. The British fired on them. It was dawn. Johnny licked his lips. Did they tell you the names of those killed? No. Did Rab get out in time? Yes, last Sunday. The doctor's clear blue eyes darkened. He knew what was in Johnny's mind. He picked up his bag. I've got to get to them. They'll need surgeons. Then, too, I'd rather die fighting than on a gallows. Gage won't be so lenient now, soon as he learns war has begun. Wait until I get my shoes on. No, Johnny. You are to stay here today. Pick up for me any information. For instance, out of my bedroom window, I can see soldiers standing the length of the street way over to the common. You can find out what regiments are being sent and all that. And today, go about and listen to what folk are saying and the names of any the British arrest. We know Gage expects to move his men back here tonight. If so, there will be a lot of confusion getting them into town. You watch your chance and slip out to me. Where'll I find you? God knows. Ask about. I will do so. They've begun it. We'll end it. But this war, it may last quite a long time. They shook hands silently. Johnny knew that Warren was always conscious of the fact that he had a crippled hand. Everybody else had accepted and forgotten it. The back door closed softly. Warren was gone. Johnny went to the surgery, put on his boots and jacket. The wall clock said 8 o'clock. It was time to be about. There was no leaving by the front door. The soldiers were leaning against it. Through the curtains of the windows, he could see the muskets. He noticed the facings on their uniforms. The 23rd Regiment. The narrow course of Tremont Street was filled to the brim and overflowing with the waiting, scarlet-coated men. Like a river of blood, he left by the kitchen. And I'm going to continue with section 2 since that was so short, and 2 is also not too long. Section 2. On Cornhill, Johnny could feel this subdued excitement. Everyone knew something was happening. No one knew what. Doors and windows were open. People hanging out, calling back and forth, or gathered in knots in the street. Johnny kept his eyes and ears open. Everyone knew about that secret expedition last night. Colonel Smith had embarked with 700 men and landed in Cambridge. That Gage was sending over at least 1,000 fresh troops to support him. That Gage might do this to support him, anyone might guess. But the people of Boston knew no more than Gage, that the fighting had begun. Johnny went to the Province House. All was as usual. The sentries were on guard. Young officers lounged about. One was already in his cups. Johnny could see that a group of them were playing at cards in the south parlor. Perhaps they were finishing off the game they had begun last night. He knew which was General Gage's bedroom. The curtains were still drawn. That means closed. Colonel Smith's early call for reserves evidently had not upset the commanding officer. He had given the order which set Percy's 1st Brigade in motion, had rolled over, and gone to sleep. So basically, like, kind of lazy, like, well, get out there then and fight. Johnny went to the common. He had already seen the tail of Percy's brigade lashing around Dr. Warren's house. The head of this scarlet dragon lay upon the common. The men were restless, grumbling, spitting, shifting their heavy equipment. Some had already been standing about for 3 hours. Johnny learned from one of their camp women what was causing the delay. They were waiting to be joined by a detachment of Marines. He looked about and saw for himself these 1,200 men were taking with them cannon and baggage wagons. So this is kind of, if you're too literal, this can be confusing. There's no dragon, okay? This is realistic fiction, but there's no dragon. When the soldiers are snaking through the streets of Boston, it appears that there are so many of them that it's a red dragon or like a snake or something. It's just this long trail of red coats. And so the head of it lay upon the commons, and that's going to be the big circular part. It's not a dragon. It's just the arrangement of the men. The tension among the inhabitants was growing. What had happened? What was going to happen? Shops and schools were closed, and Johnny met a wreath of tiny children advancing and chanting, "School's done, war's begun." It looked to him they were shrewder guessers than their elders, who were trying to believe that not a shot had been or would be fired. Then from over North Boston way came the brisk rattle of drums. Tsh, tsh. The 500 Marines, billeted all about North Square, arrived at double quick, like double time, like let's hustle, almost a jog. They took their places in the ranks. Some were still buckling their equipment or eating the bread that had been tossed to them. They had been hours late, but when they had been notified, they came fast. Tagging after them, looking half awake and half dressed, Johnny recognized an old acquaintance. It was Madge, even fatter since her marriage and seemingly more in love than ever. Tears streamed down her thick red cheeks, and, all old animosity forgotten, she flung herself upon Johnny. I can't bear it, but he says he's got to go. Nearby, tough little Sergeant Gale was strutting about like a bantam cock, roaring at one of his men whose buttons did not shine. He was pretending not to know that his wife was so nearby. He was really showing off in front of her and approved her presence. Men went to war and women wept. All was as it should be. At least that at that time, right? That's what they thought. Sure, he's got to go, Johnny comforted Madge, but people say Gage is just sending out the brigade for exercise. They've been sitting about barracks catching fleas all winter. Why were the Marines late? Gage sent a letter to Major Pitcairn telling him to parade his men, but Pitcairn wasn't to home. Oh, Pitcairn went off last night, second in command to Colonel Smith. Did you know that? The Marines didn't know until about 10 minutes ago. Johnny had to laugh. It certainly would hearten Dr. Warren when he heard how stupid the British had been. Gage had forgotten the Marine major had already gone and had sent him a letter and then turned over for another snooze. Suddenly, there was silence along the whole great length of the brigade. Slim Earl Percy on a white horse, escorted by a group of officers, was cantering slowly across the common. 5 mounted men. The sun was bright that day, with only breeze enough to ruffle the horses' manes, flaunt scarlet riding capes, float the flag of England. Johnny was an Englishman. The sullen, rebellious people standing about, watching Percy and his staff approaching, waiting for the brigade to march, all were Englishmen. That flag, it stood for Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, Charles I's head upon a block, centuries of struggle for English liberty. But over here, there had grown up a broader interpretation of the word liberty. No man to be ruled or taxed except by men of his own choice. But we are still fighting for English liberty, and don't you forget it. French slaves to the north of us, Spanish slaves to the south of us. Only English colonies are allowed to taste the forbidden fruit of liberty. We who grew up under England. Johnny thought of James Otis's words. Upholding the torch of liberty, which had been lighted on the fires of England. Okay, so the rebels are fighting for more than just England. Remember the talk that James Otis gave? This is for everyone who is a slave or who is a lower class person. Not since the soldiers had come to Boston had Johnny removed his hat when the British flag went by, except once when it had been knocked off his head by a soldier. He started to remove it now, for the first time, and doubtless the last. Thought better of it? It was too late. He knew the shooting had begun. The sword in Earl Percy's hand flashed. There was a command which was instantly picked up and repeated and echoed and repeated again. The regiment, like all the way down, the length of the brigade, like the dragon, they have to shout it because they don't have microphones. So they hear the command and then they shout it to the next brigade. Then they hear the command, then the next brigade shouts it, so it goes down, and so on, all through the town. Echoed and repeated again. The regimental drummers struck up. The artillery horses threw their weight against their collars. Wagoners cracked their whips, and the scarlet dragon swung forward, sluggishly at first, heading for the town gates. Thousands of separate feet merged into only one gigantic pair. Left, right, left, right. The earth shook to their rhythm. Johnny watched them pass. Every button was sewed on, every buckle in place. Every cartridge box held exactly 36 cartridges. Every musket had a bayonet, and there was not one old fowling piece among them. These are like all nice weapons. Every horse had 4 new shoes. It was a magnificent sight, but Johnny felt a little sick. What chance, what shadow of a chance had those poor, untrained, half-armed farmers at Concord? Oh, God, be with us now. But even as he prayed, he kept an eye out for the regimental markings on the men's uniforms. Remember, that's what Dr. Warren told him to do. It was the 4th, the 23rd, and the 47th who were being sent out, plus 500 Marines, plus a small artillery train and a few baggage wagons. 1,200 for a guess. The drums throbbed, the heavy dragon marched on its thousands of feet, and now above the drums came the shrilling of the fifes. They played a tune they always played when they wished to insult Yankees. For once, more Yankee Doodle was going to town on a spanking stallion with that forlorn feather in his cap, asking those unmilitary questions. Poor Yankee Doodle. Whatever could he do against this great scarlet dragon? That's the end of this video and the end of sections 1 and 2 in chapter 11. We'll see you on the next video.